Okay, so at this point I pretty much gave up on my bard for the weekend and I decided to jump onto my monk. I kind of wandered around for an hour or so, not really knowing where I should go to try and find a group. I decided to just go to Karnal's Castle in the end, because not only is it a good spot for experience and potential loot, but I also need to get my hands on the metal pipe from the Drollvarg Paulbuster for the next part of my epic. Karnal's Castle stands bleakly in the centre of the Dreadlands. Once one of the major military establishments of the Ixar Empire, it now stands in ruins. The inhabitants within are maintained in their unholy life by the eternal Ixar vampire, Veneral Sathir. Now, Karnal's Castle has been dubbed the home of trains for quite a long time in EverQuest. Even one of the messages that pops up on the loading screen when you load the game is Karnal's Castle 56 million trains served. With that in mind, there is a system in place on P99. When you're heading towards the exit, you always train to the right, the left side being the safe spot that everyone sits. It had been a long time since I'd grouped here in KC, so I'd forgotten quite a lot of the zone, but I did spend a lot of time here back on live, so it started coming back to me fairly quickly. I really do love the layout of this zone. It's a perfect mix of simplicity and complexity. As you enter the zone, you instantly come upon a moat. This brings us up to our first camp labelled Captain. It's called this because the Drollvarg Captain spawns inside this moat. This is a nice, simple little camp. You have several mobs who spawn up here on the surrounding ramparts, and then down below on the drawbridge you have access to more. However, these all tend to be free game because they're positioned along the path to the exit. You also have several mobs that patrol the waters in the surrounding moat. These are also free game, but with Levitate it can provide some extra juicy XP during downtime while you're waiting for mobs in your camp to respawn. Heading further along the drawbridge, you enter the main castle, opening with the left courtyard and the right courtyard, otherwise known as LCY and RCY. Now, left courtyard is probably the best spot for XP between level 50 and 55, just because of the huge flow of lower end monsters that can be pulled here. Right courtyard is also good, but it has less easily accessible mobs. Both left courtyard and right courtyard tend to compete for mobs along the ramparts of the castle and other surrounding areas. Heading upstairs and deeper into the castle, you find the Hand Room. This camp is a bit slower than left courtyard, but it gives you access to some of the higher level mobs in the zone. There is a hand named Hangnail that can spawn in this room, sometimes even back to back. He has a chance to drop some pretty cool loot too. Just around the corner from this room, you have the jail, which leads down into the Warlord Room. Now, the Warlord Room is often pulled by the Hand Room, but it can be claimed as its own individual camp. This room spawns the Drollvarg Warlord, he drops some really cool loot, and the Drollvarg Paulbuster. The Paulbuster is the guy that drops a metal pipe, which is what I need for the next part in my epic. Just around the corner from the Hand and the Warlord Room are the stairs that lead down into the basement area. On this side, there's a camp called the Turnkey. It's named this because there's a mob called Spectral Turnkey that spawns down here, and he drops some nifty stuff too. Everything down here is undead, so classes like Necros, Pallies and Clerics can have a lot of fun grouping here. The layout is very overwhelming at first, and you can very easily get lost and turned around if you're new, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. It's pretty much a big circle, and a good rule of thumb is if you are heading upstairs, you're usually heading towards the exit. The last camp worth mentioning is the actual basement. You can either go past the Turnkey group and go down one level further, or from the moat's southeast corner, there's a neat little water entrance that you can find. You can also jump down the well in the left courtyard, but that's a bit riskier. If the zone is not completely packed, this is another really fast-paced camp, because you have so many mobs at your disposal. Levitate is also really invaluable down here, because a lot of these little passageways have trenches that are full of water, and when you're pulling 3 or 4 mobs back to your group, you have to stop running and swim through one of these. It's never fun. There are also a couple of named mobs down here who drop some really nice stuff, but one worth mentioning especially is Verix Kylox, or the remains of Verix Kylox I should say. He drops the Kylong medallion, which is used for the Vishan's Peak key. Now, I mentioned earlier that Karnal's Castle is home to the Ixar vampire named Veneral Sathir. This guy's a raid target and he drops all the Kunark class leg pieces, as well as several two-handed caster staves. He spawns in the center of the castle in his own little room. Now, don't make the same mistake I did and fall down into this area, because unless you have a rogue friend nearby, once you're on the bottom floor, all the doors are locked. But because of that, it makes this area a gold mine if you do have a rogue in your group to open the doors. Right courtyard, left courtyard, the Hand and the Warlord Room all have paths leading into this spot. It just adds a bunch of extra mobs that you can pull back to your group, so keep that in mind if you're ever pulling here. Luckily, when I got stuck down here, there were almost 100 people in the zone, so there was never really a mob up for more than a few seconds before someone was killing it. I just waited around for a few minutes and eventually a rogue came in here to pull something and I ducked out the door. If it was off-peak and there were less than 10 people in the zone, which there usually are, I would have been screwed. Veneral Sathir is on a 7-day respawn timer with a 16-hour variance. But he was killed twice during the double XP weekend because the GMs did an earthquake, which to my knowledge seems to respawn all the raid targets, or at least sets them back to the beginning of their variant. So 2 days in a row there were like 150 people just chilling in KC, and both times when the rush to engage him happened, I got that same awesome desync. Now that seems to be a pattern when anything involving lots of mobs or players happens, and both times I had to relog to fix it. However, for the most part of the double XP weekend, I was pretty fortunate. Every time that I logged in, I found a group almost instantly, and I'd just ride it out from start to finish. It's rather amusing because I kind of did each camp in order as well. The first night that I got here, I got into a captain group. Now, a common theme throughout grouping here over the weekend was to have 2 monks in the group. Because there are over 50 people in the zone, all fighting for mobs, we would have both monks just going out and getting anything they could get their hands on. I've learned that P99's rules tend to fray a little over double XP weekends, as people just try and steal as much shit as they can from everyone else, but most of the time it's all good and fun. There were only 2 or 3 times where it was actually annoying. During the captain group, I would just pull everything that I could find around the moat and the entrance, while the other monk would run off and snipe shit from the basement. He even managed to get a spectral turnkey and Kylox's remains all the way back to the captain group, which I thought was rather impressive. Now, it was off-peak at the time, and the zone was as quiet as it was going to get, so I like to think that he didn't steal these mobs from other groups, but I honestly don't know. From here we moved on to the right courtyard as soon as it opened up. The flow of mobs increased a little bit from here, but the real show was happening over in the left courtyard. I was sad that I wasn't part of this group, but these guys were absolutely slaughtering this zone that night. They had their bard putting in some serious work. He was just constantly crowd controlling what looked to be 10 mobs at a time by kiting them in a circle around the group. By the looks of it, they just had him doing this while the monk was just off pulling everything he could find. Then I guess the other 4 in the group were just sat there fighting non-stop, because as soon as one mob fell, they had another 10 waiting for them. I'd say for 4 or so hours that I was here, they were doing this consistently, and I think I only saw them maybe once. So GG to those guys, whoever they were. I'm in awe of the amount of XP you must have gotten during this. So I got from 52 to 53 on the Friday night. The second day I logged in, and straight away I landed a turnkey group. And this was trial by fire, because I couldn't really remember my way around the basement at all, but I did learn to navigate pretty quickly. This group was good. Pretty average mob flow because the zone was busy at this time, and for a long while we were rocking only 5 members instead of 6 because we just couldn't seem to find the right classes to fill the last spot. I got about halfway through level 53 here. Eventually we were down to 4 guys and we decided to call it after a wipe. I took a break for the rest of the afternoon and I jumped back on later that night during off-peak. This was one time I didn't find a group straight away, but instead I started duoing around the side of the moat with a Shadow Knight. From here we got an Enchanter, and then a Cleric, and we moved on to right courtyard. It didn't take long before we had almost a full group, and we quickly claimed the hand room as soon as it opened up. Again, here we had a double monk setup. And again, I would pull everything from our camp and the surrounding areas while the other monk ran off and grabbed anything else he could find. We also had a rogue, so we were able to pull stuff from Veneral Sathir's area as well. This was a really fun group. I really enjoyed the hand camp. We pretty much had free reign over the Warlord room the whole time we were here too, apart from once or twice having it taken before we could get to it. I got almost all of 53 on the second day. Now on the third day, I hit it pretty hard. Straight away I got into a turnkey group. We were in this camp for a long time, but again, it was really busy. I'd say that the Sunday was the busiest that it got over the long weekend, and it's also where people started getting a little frustrating. There were times where our supply of mobs would be almost non-existent because of the people just blatantly stealing our shit. It was all fun and games in the first 2 days and everyone was having a giggle, but it's like the gloves came off the closer it was getting to the end of the weekend. I wasn't going to take it lying down. This was another group where we had 2 monks, except this time it was my turn to run off and look for extra mobs. The amount of times that I saw other monks just run into our camp and blatantly steal mobs from right in front of us, it was just ridiculous. At first I tried to reason with one of these guys, but he was adamant that the only mobs that belonged to the turnkey group were the mobs that spawned in the room that we were camped in, and everything else down in the catacombs was free game. Well, newsflash genius, nothing actually spawns in this room that we're camped in, and the only mobs that we pull are the ones in the surrounding corridors. Eventually the basement opened up, and we claimed that, and the flow of mobs got a lot better. This was as the weekend was coming to a close, and the later that it got, the harder it became to find replacements that we needed. We pretty much rode this group to the very end of the double XP event. It was about a few hours before it ended that we were down to just 4 of us, and we decided to call it a night. During that last day I hit 54, which was a nasty hell level, and I managed to get about 70% of the way through it. It ended up taking me all of next week just playing my normal hours to get the other 30% of that level. But there it is, guys. I managed to climb over the line and reach level 55. So Reptox's title has gone from Disciple to Master, and I got 2 new disciplines. The first one is Whirlwind, which allows me to riposte every attack for 9 seconds, and the second one is Voidance, which allows me to avoid melee attacks for 8 seconds. Unfortunately, the reuse timer for both of these is an hour, so that's a bit brutal, but hey, shit's classic. I'm really at the point on my monk where I need to get my ass into gear and get my Severus key and my Howling Stones key done. I also have almost all the components for a bunch of Black Panther skin armor. That's a really nice craftable monk armor that came out with Velios. I just need to find a tailor who can make some for me that won't charge me an arm and a leg for each combine. I also really want to move on to Velios and do some stuff in Velks and maybe even Kale. And I have some old footage from around level 50 when I got that group in the hole, and I'd really like to make an episode of that, but I just need some more stuff from there. So if I can find a really good group to go down there with and get the rest of that stuff, then there'll be a whole episode on that as well. I got a few quick shout outs. I wanted to thank Zadis, who came all the way out to Carnors to tank for me so my group wouldn't fall apart. Apprentice, who was one of the only others in the group from start to finish on the Sunday. Mesmaster Flex, sorry for all the wipes at the end there, it was a really long day. Nikal, thank you for fully buffing me while I was looking for a group. ZK and Port Please for hitting me up with buffs while they were sitting there staring at a wall waiting for Veneral Sathir to spawn. But anyway, I don't know when or what the next video is going to be. Probably something that I've just mentioned. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.